It rained the morning the letter arrived. Not the kind of rain that rushes in and leaves quickly. This one lingered soft and steady, like it had nowhere else to go. The sky was a dull gray sheet, pressed low against the roofs, and the world outside my window seemed half asleep. I remember the sound, that gentle, uneven tapping against the glass, and how it matched the rhythm of my heart as I opened the mailbox. There were the usual things: bills, circulars, one glossy real estate flyer, and then, at the bottom, an envelope heavier than the rest. Cream-colored, expensive paper. The kind that looks too formal for good news. The return address read, Patterson and Locke, Attorneys at Law. I stood there in my doorway, still dripping from the rain, staring at it. I don't know why I didn't open it right away. Maybe some part of me already knew. That instinct you get before your life splits in half. Before the version of you that existed yesterday quietly stops existing. When I finally tore it open, the words blurred for a moment, not from tears but from disbelief. Plaintiffs, Richard and Elaine Mercer. My parents. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to shrink until it was just that sheet of paper and the steady hum of rain. I reread the line over and over, as if repetition could change the meaning. They were suing me. For $350,000. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking. The clock ticked softly beside me, marking the moments since my family became something else. Not parents and daughter, but plaintiffs and defendant. I read the letter again, slower this time. Legal phrasing, stiff and cold. Allegations of a verbal commitment to assume liability for the outstanding mortgage of Ms. Claire Mercer. Claire. My sister. Of course. I stared at her name until it blurred too. Outside, the rain trickled down the window like tears the sky was kind enough to shed for me. My body felt heavy, but my mind was already rewinding, going back to the beginning of this quiet unraveling. It started 2 months earlier with a phone call. I remember because I was folding laundry, half listening to an old song when my phone lit up with Mom. Hi, Mom, I said, smiling automatically. Her voice was too bright. Nora, finally I caught you. I've been meaning to talk about something important. I pressed the phone between my shoulder and ear. What's up? It's Claire, she said. The bank's threatening foreclosure. You know how things have been since that business loan? I closed my eyes. Here we go again. She's drowning, Nora. The interest alone is killing her. And your father and I, well, we can't keep covering for her. Not this time. You're the only one who can help. I set the laundry down. Help how? You could take over her mortgage for a while, she said, like she was suggesting I water the plants. You make good money. You're responsible. It would just be temporary until she gets back on her feet. Mom, I said quietly, already feeling my pulse rise. I can't do that. I have my own mortgage, my own bills. That's not something I can just, it's family. She interrupted, sharp now. You think you got where you are by yourself? We sacrificed for you. We paid for your degree. You owe us, Nora. That word, oh, it landed like a slap. I hadn't heard it in years, but it still hurt the same. I wanted to remind her that I'd paid them back. Every cent of my student loans. Every favor. Every sacrifice. Quietly, without announcing it. I wanted to remind her of the nights I stayed up helping Dad balance their accounts when he couldn't read the numbers anymore. The weekends I drove 2 hours just to fix a broken light fixture or mow the lawn. But I didn't say any of that. I just whispered, I can't, Mom. I'm sorry. The silence that followed stretched on, thick and heavy. I could hear her breathing, shaky and disappointed. So that's it, she said finally. You're just going to let your sister lose her home? I'm not letting her lose anything. I just can't save her this time. Her voice trembled, part anger, part wounded pride. You've changed, Nora. And just like that, she hung up. I stood there for a while, phone still in hand, listening to the emptiness that followed her absence. I didn't know it then, but that was the last normal conversation I'd ever have with my mother. A week later, Claire texted me. I heard you told Mom no. I don't know what's wrong with you. No greeting. No punctuation. Just that sentence, sharp as glass. I didn't reply, because I didn't have the strength to explain something they'd never understand. The truth was, Claire's home wasn't just a home. It was a 3-story monument to bad decisions. A house she bought on emotion, filled with things she couldn't afford. She called it investing in her future. My parents called it helping her dream. And when it all began to collapse, they turned to me. Like they always did. Growing up, it was the same pattern. When Claire broke something, I fixed it. When she cried, I comforted her. When she lied, I took the blame. Be the bigger person, Mom would say. You're older. She looks up to you. But she never did. She only looked past me, straight to the next person who'd rescue her, and every time I told myself I didn't mind. That it was love. That families did this for each other. But now, sitting in my kitchen, staring at a lawsuit from my own parents, I finally saw it for what it was. Not love, but control disguised as devotion. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat on the floor, surrounded by the quiet hum of the house, tracing the edges of the letter again and again. My mind kept circling one memory. A Sunday afternoon years ago, when Claire and I were still teenagers. Dad was in the yard fixing his truck. Mom was baking. Claire had crashed her car the week before, her third accident that year, and instead of grounding her, my parents surprised her with another one. I remember watching through the window as they handed her the keys, her smile wide and careless. Then Mom turned to me and said, "You'll get one too someday, when you earn it." That was the first time I learned that in our family. Love wasn't unconditional. It was a reward for obedience. And tonight, decades later, I realized that lesson never expired. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, the drops falling further apart. I stood, walked to the window, and pressed my palm against the cool glass. My reflection looked pale, tired, but also clear in a way I hadn't seen in years. I whispered into the stillness, "I'm not paying for her mistakes." Saying it out loud felt dangerous, like breaking an invisible law. But at the same time, it felt like breathing after holding my lungs empty for too long. I folded the lawsuit carefully and placed it on the table. Not as something I'd ignore, but as something I'd finally face. Because this time, I wouldn't apologize for choosing peace over guilt. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away, low and distant, not threatening, just reminding the storm had started. And for once, I wasn't afraid of getting wet. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. 5 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, and 1 long, rambling voice message from Claire. I didn't press play. I just sat there in bed, staring at the glow of the screen. The house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that hums behind your ribs. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind the damp smell of earth and the faint glimmer of sunlight fighting through the clouds. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd come to their senses. That the letter had been a mistake, a scare tactic maybe, something my mother never intended to follow through on. She'd always been dramatic when cornered, turning hurt into performance. But when I finally opened the voicemail, her voice wasn't angry, it was cold. "You've left us no choice, Nora. You forced our hand. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To stand on your own, separate from your family. Congratulations." "You got it." Then a pause and a softer line, almost whispered. "I don't know what happened to the daughter we raised." The words sliced deeper than the lawsuit ever could. I pressed my thumb against the table edge, grounding myself in something solid. Because the truth was, I did know what happened to her. She grew tired of paying for everyone else's comfort with her own exhaustion. That week, I called a lawyer. His name was Daniel Moore, quiet, composed, a man who seemed to have seen every variety of family implosion. When I told him who the plaintiffs were, he leaned back in his chair and blinked, as if he thought he'd misheard me. "Your parents?" he repeated slowly. "Yes," I said. "My parents." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded almost reluctantly. "Okay, let's go through it." As we went line by line through the claim, my hands kept twisting in my lap. They accused me of promising to assume partial financial responsibility for Claire's mortgage. They quoted things I supposedly said, words I never used. "We'll figure something out. I'll help if I can. You know I won't let her lose the house." Fragments. Half phrases twisted into contracts. "Can they do this?" I asked finally, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He sighed. "Legally? They can try. But from what you've shown me, there's no basis. No written agreement, no financial transfers, nothing binding. So they'll lose?" He gave a half smile that wasn't really a smile. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean it won't cost you. Time, energy, peace. That's the thing about lawsuits between family. The law can end it on paper, but emotionally, it'll drag you through hell. I stared at the table. I guess I've already been there. The first hearing date came faster than I expected. Walking into the courthouse felt like walking into someone else's life. Surreal, dreamlike, detached. My parents were already seated at the far end of the room. My father's hands were folded neatly in front of him, his expression unreadable. My mother wouldn't look at me. She was wearing her church pearls, the same ones she always wore on important days. Her hair was perfectly set, her posture perfect, like she'd rehearsed this moment. And maybe she had. Maybe in her mind this wasn't betrayal, but justice. Claire sat behind them, avoiding my eyes. She was pale, thinner than I remembered, her jaw tight. For a fleeting second, I wanted to go to her, to ask how she was, to remind her we were sisters before we became symbols in our parents' war. But I didn't move. Because in that room, she wasn't my sister, she was their witness. That night, I went home and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. My face looked older, not from age, but from the weight of holding everything together for too long. For decades, keeping the peace had been my role. I was the mediator, the fixer, the one who smoothed over my parents' fights, covered Claire's mistakes, calmed everyone down. I'd been trained to make things easier for everyone but myself. And now, the irony, they were punishing me for finally stopping. I thought back to my mother's voice in that voicemail. I don't know what happened to the daughter we raised. The truth was, she didn't lose me. She just couldn't control me anymore. In the weeks that followed, I learned more about silence than I ever wanted to. People stopped calling. Cousins who used to message me suddenly vanished from group chats. My aunt sent a short text. I don't want to take sides, honey, but maybe you could just pay something? Keep the peace? There it was again. That sacred phrase, keep the peace, even when it meant burning yourself to keep everyone else warm. I started writing in a journal again, something I hadn't done since college. It wasn't to vent. It was to remember who I was beneath their noise. I wrote about the day I left home at 18, how free I felt walking into my first apartment with nothing but a mattress and hope. I wrote about the day I paid off my student loans. The letter I never sent them because I thought humility was expected. And I wrote about Claire. How she once whispered to me after one of Mom's lectures. "You're the strong one, Nora. You make them proud so I don't have to." I had believed her then. But now, reading those words back, I realized she'd meant something else entirely. That I was the shield that kept their disappointment from touching her. One night, around midnight, my doorbell rang. I hesitated before opening it, heart pounding. It was my mother, standing there in the dim porch light, her coat soaked, her eyes puffy like she'd been crying. For a moment, she looked small, human. Not the woman from the courtroom, not the voice from the voicemail, but just, "Mom, Nora," she whispered. I opened the door halfway. "Mom, it's late." "I know," she said quickly. I can't sleep. This whole thing has gotten out of hand." I wanted to believe her. I really did. "Then stop it," I said quietly. "You can withdraw the case? We can talk." But she shook her head, tears glinting in the light. "It's not that simple. Your father feels disrespected. He says you made promises. You embarrassed us." I felt something inside me snap. Not loud, not violent. Just a quiet breaking. "Mom," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you've mistaken my boundaries for disrespect. You've mistaken my independence for rebellion." She stared at me, trembling. "We're your parents." "I know," I whispered. "But that doesn't mean you own me." For a second, I thought she might reach for me. But she didn't. She just looked past me into the house. The framed photos, the books, the plants I'd kept alive on my own. I saw the moment she realized I had a life outside of them, and how much that truth frightened her. She turned to leave. But before she did, she said something that haunted me for weeks. "You'll regret this, Nora. Maybe not now, but someday. Family always wins." And then she was gone. I stood there long after her car disappeared down the street. The night air was cold, the street quiet except for the faint buzz of a street lamp. Family always wins. I whispered the words to myself until they lost their shape. Because maybe for the first time, I was starting to understand. Sometimes the only way to win in a family like mine was to stop playing. That night, I took out the lawsuit again. I laid it flat on the table and stared at it until the letters blurred. Then slowly, I tore off one corner, just enough to break its perfection. A small act of defiance, quiet but deliberate, and I promised myself I would fight this. Not just for my name, but for the version of me they tried to erase, the daughter who had always existed beneath their expectations, waiting for permission to breathe. The next morning, I called Daniel. My voice didn't shake this time. "Let's go all the way," I said. No settlement, no silence. For the first time, I felt like my own words belonged to me. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polished floors. It was strange how ordinary everything looked, considering what it represented, the collapse of a family dressed in legal terms. I sat beside Daniel, the sound of shuffling papers and murmured conversations echoing off the high ceiling. Across the room, my parents were talking quietly with their lawyer. My father's hair had gone grayer since the first hearing. My mother's eyes flicked toward me once, then away, as if looking too long might undo her resolve. Claire sat behind them again, her gaze fixed on her phone. Daniel leaned close. "They're offering another settlement," he whispered. "Drop the case if you pay a portion, $50,000. I took a slow breath. "No." "You're sure?" I nodded. "If I pay, it means they were right. It means they can still buy my silence," he didn't argue. Just gave a small, understanding nod and leaned back. When the judge entered, everyone stood. My heart thudded, heavy but steady. I wasn't scared anymore, just hollow. Like fear had already burned through me and left something cleaner behind. The testimonies blurred together, their lawyer insisting I'd verbally agreed to assume the debt, twisting vague sentences into promises. My mother's trembling voice describing how she'd never imagined her daughter could betray her family. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, palms damp, knees shaking just slightly. The courtroom felt too bright. I looked at the judge, then at my parents. And then I said quietly but clearly, "I never agreed to pay my sister's mortgage. I said I'd see what I could do. That's all." I was pressured. I was guilted. But I didn't promise. And even if I had said yes in a moment of weakness, and it shouldn't have become this. Families don't take each other to court to prove who loves more. My voice cracked at the end, but I didn't apologize for it. The judge listened. Everyone did. Even Claire finally looked up. Then Daniel spoke, methodical and precise, dismantling every claim point by point. By the end, their case looked paper thin, like something that had only ever been held together by pride. When the judge finally announced his ruling, case dismissed, lack of evidence, and the room went silent. My parents didn't move. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's hands twisted in her lap. Claire stood, staring at me with something between anger and confusion, like she didn't know whether to hate me or envy me. I just sat there, breathing. Not victorious, not vengeful, just free. After the hearing, I walked out into the courtyard. It was early afternoon, sunlight spilling through the trees in soft golden shards. For months, I'd been walking in storms. Today, finally, the sky was clear. Daniel followed behind me, his steps quiet. "You handled that with grace," he said. "Grace?" I laughed softly. "I felt like I was falling apart," he smiled. "That's what grace looks like sometimes." He left soon after, and I stood alone under the open sky. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, but around me, it was calm. I didn't know where to go, so I just walked, through the park, past the courthouse steps, until I reached a small cafe I used to visit in college. I hadn't been there in years. The waitress smiled as if nothing in the world was heavy. I ordered tea, sat by the window, and watched people pass by, strangers with their own invisible battles. And it hit me then. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for anyone else's story, only my own. That night, I drove by my parents' house. I didn't plan to go inside, I just needed to see it one more time. The porch light was still the same. The wind chime still hung crooked from the awning. Through the window, I could see my mother in the living room, reading. My father beside her, watching the news. Claire wasn't there. For a brief second, I almost got out of the car. Almost walked up to the door like old times. But then I remembered the letter. The lawsuit. The look on my mother's face when she said family always wins. I sat there a few minutes longer, then pulled out a folded sheet of paper from my bag, the one I'd written weeks ago but never mailed. "I love you, but I will not be your solution. I am your daughter, not your insurance policy. I read it again under the porch-light glow, then folded it back and tucked it in the glove compartment. Some letters aren't meant to be sent. They're meant to free you. The next morning, I donated the box of old family photos I'd been keeping, not out of spite, but to let them exist somewhere outside the weight of memory. I kept only one, a picture from when I was 6, sitting on my father's shoulders at the lake, my mother laughing beside us, Claire's tiny hand clutching mine. Before things became complicated, before love became a transaction. I framed that one and placed it on my desk. A reminder that once, we did love each other. And maybe, somewhere under all the hurt, that love still existed. Just not the kind that demanded my silence anymore. Weeks passed. The quiet settled differently now, lighter. I still got the occasional text from relatives trying to mediate, but I didn't respond. I stopped explaining myself. There's a strange peace that comes when you realize you don't owe anyone your justification. One Sunday afternoon, as autumn rolled in, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee. The air was cool, crisp. The trees had started turning, the world shifting colors quietly. That's when Claire called. I hesitated before answering. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Hey. Hey. There was a long pause. Then she said, It's over, huh? It's over. Another pause. Then softly. They're still angry. I know. I didn't mean for it to get this bad, she whispered. Mom said you'd help and I let her believe it. I didn't stop her. I closed my eyes. I know you didn't. I'm sorry, she said, and for once she meant it. I didn't say I forgive you, not because I didn't, but because forgiveness wasn't the point anymore. Instead, I said, I hope you're okay. She exhaled, a shaky little sound. I'm trying to be. That's enough, I said. We said goodbye, and when the call ended, I didn't cry. I just sat there, watching a single leaf drift down from the maple tree in my yard. It landed softly on the ground, spinning once before it stilled, and in that moment I realized, peace doesn't come after the storm. It comes when you finally stop standing in the rain, waiting for someone else to hand you an umbrella. Later that evening, I went to my desk, opened the drawer, and took out the old lawsuit envelope. I unfolded it one last time. The creases worn, the ink faded slightly at the edges. Then I lit a candle and held the paper above the flame. It caught slowly, curling, turning black. I watched until the fire consumed the last letter of my name. The smoke drifted upward, soft and thin, disappearing into the night. When it was gone, I blew out the candle. The air smelled faintly of something burnt, but the space around me felt clean. I opened the window. Cool air brushed against my skin, carrying the scent of rain returning somewhere far away. And for the first time in years, I whispered a truth that no one could take from me. I am enough. No courtroom could decide that. No parent could revoke it. No sister could replace it. Just me. Standing alone, not in defiance, but in peace.